So, good morning and welcome to this panel discussion on aging and technology and the updates. We have, this is our second year running doing this, and we're so pleased to have our two speakers who will be introduced by Dr. Steen to really bring us up to date on how all the various progress and developments in the world of technology can be translated into helping us age gracefully and productively. And it is just so fascinating to see all the different things that can and are being done with technology. And we will be treated to the most up-to-date information brought up by the White House panel on aging and technology and their recently released report. So I would invite you to basically sit back and have your pens and papers to take notes if you want, and to really get an update. You know, we do this panel in conjunction with, in collaboration with Science, Technology, and Business Division in Library Services, and I think that it is such a worthwhile endeavor. It educates both our internal staff as well as the public on the latest in that field. And as we, the aging population, baby boomers are the largest proportion of that population, and we don't want to stop. We don't want to slow down. But sometimes things happen, and we need a little help. And not only that, this will give us a little help to do more of what we want to do and actually keep our brains going. So it is really a very fascinating topic and well worth the hour and a half that we will spend with our two esteemed speakers here this morning. So I am going to ask Dr. Steen to come up to introduce our speakers. We are going to have a sign-in sheet in the back, so before you go, make sure, oh, great, it's going around. So because we want to know how to reach you, to share any other information with you, and to let you know about future topics. And I promise you, you will not be bored or sorry that you came. So without any further ado, Dr. Steen.
Thank you. So this is a co-sponsor with Science and Technology and Business Division with Health Office. And we've been doing many interesting lecture series, including Cancer and Moonshot coming up in October, as well as circadian clock story to alternative medicine. So looking forward to the upcoming good lectures. Today we have two speakers. Dr. Vijeth Iyengar is from Health and Human Services. He's a brain health lead as well as a technical advisor to the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Aging at the Institute. And we also have Dr. Nina Silverberg. She's from Aging Institute. She's an Alzheimer expert, and she's a director of the Aging Institute coming from the National Institute of Health. And we have two speakers' bio in a handout right there, and you can look at more detail. And instead of I spend too much time, let's hear the interesting stories. Please.
Thank you, Dr. Steen and Dr. Charles. It's very much appreciated. I feel like with the intros and bios, we have a lot to live up to, so hopefully we won't disappoint. So it's a pleasure to be here again. We were here in October for part one of this series, talking about our progress on the White House National Science and Technology Council report on emerging technologies to support an aging population. At that time, we were providing a progress report as my role as executive secretary, Nina as co-chair of the task force, and we're pleased to be here again with you all today, about 2 months or so after the release of the report. In case folks are wondering what the report looks like, I brought a couple of physical copies of the report in case folks want to read this as we go along. So it's a pleasure to be here again, and again, thank you for the opportunity. So just a quick disclaimer. So the views and opinions expressed in this presentation are those of the presenters and not necessarily of the presenter organizations, including the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, Administration for Community Living, Administration on Aging, and the National Institutes on Aging and National Institutes of Health. Additionally, the views and opinions expressed in this presentation are also not necessarily of the White House National Science and Technology Council. So with that out of the way, so in terms of today's agenda, I want to give a brief snapshot of an aging demography, go over some vital statistics from the U.S. Census Bureau and the WHO, talking about the demographic imperative to find solutions, supports, and services with respect to an aging demography, both domestically and abroad. Talk about how this report came about. Maybe there's some questions as to how this task force came about, how this report came about, its goals and mandate and mission, and then talk about functional capabilities that were featured in the report, how we came about that, how there was general consensus among the many task force members that spanned across government to look at 6 or 7 functional capabilities that were deemed of necessary importance for an aging population. And then, so what's next? There's always a question as to, you have a report. It took about 2.5 years to come about. Some folks were there for about 3 years. So what's next? What could be possible? And so that's, hopefully it gives you an idea of what we hope to cover today. So we live in an increasingly aging society. This is a neat graphic from the World Report on Aging and Health, looking at the proportion of population aged 60 years or older by country in 2015. And you can see here, let's see this, the gradations of red correspond to increases in the percentage of the population that are aged 60 years or older. You see here that in 2015, there's a majority of the population for countries across the globe are experiencing an increase or experiencing a significant percentage of their population aged 60 years or older. In the decades to come, this will get increasingly the sort of population segment of the folks that are 60 years and older will increase undoubtedly in these countries. So that's the abroad situation, just to give you an idea. So what's the situation closer to home? So this is data from the United States Census Bureau showing that for the first time in the U.S. history, older adults are projected to outnumber children by year 2035. You can see here this is 2016 to 2060. Folks that are children that are under 18 are in the orange line, and adults 65 and over are in this teal blue line. And as you can see, that around 2035, as mentioned, this is sort of an inflection point wherein the number of adults 65 and older will outnumber folks that are children that are under 18 years of age. This is not exclusive to one specific race or ethnicity. This is sort of across the board. You have here on this left side of the screen on this panel 2012, on the right side of this panel 2030. We see across different ethnicities, different races, that there will be increased projections of individuals age 65 and over across the span in the U.S. So it's important to keep in mind these basic demographic snapshots as to what the problem is in terms of the numbers of folks age 60 and over, 65 and over in the decades to come. So a demographic imperative yielded an opportunity. So what can we do? We know what the data is telling us. We know what population estimates and projections are telling us. What should we do? Well, there was one of 2 reports dedicated to exploring ways in which technology or innovation in general can support the functional needs of older adults. This was a 2016 report which covered the areas of hearing loss, loss of his social engagement, which also looks at social isolation, social connectedness, and cognitive change and physical change. And this was out of the President's Council of Advisors on Science and Technology. So it looked at these three particular issues. There was a consortium of individuals from both academic, private sector, and foundation coming together to look at what are the needs or what are the best practices for these particular areas. And one cross-cutting recommendation was broadly that there should be coordinated action at the federal level, and that there should be a development of a task force that dealt with these issues, right? And indeed, it's been recognized as an area of priority across administrations. So if we look at these two particular documents, these are public. These are the OMB, or OSTP rather, Research and Priorities memos for FY 2019, FY 2020. I know it's a bit difficult to read, but what's underlined is that agencies from the FY 2019 budget, or priority memo rather, agencies should prioritize R&D focus on solutions for an aging population. Again, in FY 2020, it mentions agencies should also invest to enhance the independence, safety, well-being, and health of aging adults and those with disabilities. So as you can see, across the administration, across the years, that there's been investment, both in terms of intellectual thought leadership and investment in terms of what can the federal government do to address these issues. So as I mentioned before, I held up the report. One sort of manifestation, in my opinion, of this intellectual thought leadership investment was this report that was released in March 2019. It's a bit difficult to read, but if you can see among the members, they span across the federal government, from NASA to HUD to NIH to USDA, excuse me, to DOJ, CFPB. So it's really a cross-governmental effort to come up with research and developmental recommendations across 6 areas of need for older adults. So one question could be, what were the factors potentially driving content and the direction of the report? And one was, we wanted to highlight recommendations or functional capabilities that looked at improving the quality of life as a metric, right? Second was to enhance individual choice, empower individuals via technology or innovation to be able to be in a position for them to be able to choose where they live, who they interacted with, and empowerment of individual choice. Thirdly was to reduce the financial and emotional burden of care to individuals and their families. It won't be a surprise to this group that a large share of the burden of care is on family caregivers, both from an emotional investment and a financial investment. So the idea was, could we look at potential solutions, examining ways to then reduce this financial and emotional burden? And then to reduce the cost of the provision of care on the American healthcare infrastructure. Are there ways, R&D recommendations by which we can highlight in the report to be able to then reduce the cost of care? So I'm now going to pass it on to my colleague Nina to walk us through the functional capabilities.
Thank you, and thank you all for the invitation to be here. I really appreciate it. I just want to also acknowledge my other co-chair, Michelle Grimm. She's at NSF right now and was at NSF during the report time, and she was a tremendous leader and co-chair, and I appreciate both her efforts and Dr. Iyengar's. So as he mentioned, we have 6 areas of functional capabilities that we covered in this report, and they were driven in large part from that PCAST report that he mentioned. These were all areas that were covered in there and that we thought were important and had an opportunity to address the issues that were mentioned and to really play a role in technology and where the government and different government offices, where the recommendations from the report could span multiple government agencies. So here they are again, prettier. Key activities of independent living, cognition, communication and social connectivity, personal mobility, transportation, and access to health care. And as you might notice, there may be some overlap across them. We tried to set up different subgroups that worked on these, but there was a lot of cross-conversation across the different groups and topic areas. And as we'll mention later, some cross-cutting themes that appeared in multiple ones of these. So for key activities of independent living, These are some examples. We focused on hygiene, nutrition, and medication. These are obviously very important to older adults. And really, again, thinking about technology, how technology might be able to help, and what, as a federal government, we might recommend in terms of research that's needed to improve all of these. So just some areas that were covered under hygiene, bathing, oral, and skin care, including particularly wound prevention and care. This is a difficult area. So one example is smart bandages that might monitor healing, because underneath the bandage, we don't know what's going on. This might be a way. Under nutrition, we looked at meal preparation, shopping, and eating, including, as an example, robotic feeding systems. Obviously, some of these are not going to work on a very broad scale, but again, we're looking for ways that we might be able to help in certain situations and certain types of issues that may come up. And third example is medication management and adherence. I think people are probably more familiar with this as a way that technology may be able to help. And there are, again, multiple ways that technology might help with medication management and adherence, including wireless pill organizers, some of you may have seen, or electronic packaging for the individual, selling the different pills. The area that's near and dear to my heart is cognition. And I think most people are pretty aware that aging is associated with changes in cognition, and we're actually still trying to understand what counts as normal and what might not be normal. And so there are really many, many opportunities where technology might help us with older adults that are beginning to notice changes in their cognition. Excuse me. I should point out, as noted here, that changes in cognition can happen not just with Alzheimer's disease, but also with other age-associated conditions, including Parkinson's and Lewy body dementia. So we have millions and millions of people that are affected either directly or indirectly. I'm sure many of you in this room have had family members with Alzheimer's or other dementias, and you know that it's not just a disease that the person living with it has to deal with. Again, there are differences across the different types of cognitive issues that people can have, and this might affect what types of technology would be most useful in those situations. Additionally, older adults very frequently have numerous conditions, not one, not two, but many, many conditions they're dealing with, and many medications that they may be needing to take for all those various conditions. So, of course, changes in cognition really can lead to changes in abilities to take care of everything in everyone's daily life. So we identified some focus areas within cognition, again, largely from this PCAST report. It was a good guide for us to use. Cognitive monitoring, cognitive training, and importantly, financial security. The news article on the right comes from the New York Times several years ago, 2010, pointing out, this was a story that happened to a couple. They were rather wealthy, and really the first sign to the spouse was that there were some dramatic changes in the financial situation, and this came to the attention of one of our Alzheimer's centers, and this article was kind of the first big public noting of this fact that financial changes can be one of the first signals of cognitive impairment. And since then, a lot of research has happened to show that this can be the case, and we do have now available already financial monitoring options. But I think this is really a place where, regardless of political viewpoint, we can see that it's of value for people to be able to keep a hold of their money that they have earned and make sure that it is taken care of in a way that they would want before they have cognitive impairment. There are lots of things we can put into place to respect their views on privacy and their views on what they want to happen with their funds. The other two areas in here are cognitive monitoring. just keeping up and making sure we have an idea of how people's cognitive status might be, and cognitive training maybe to help improve the situation. I want to point out from this slide, there was a case, I think this was also maybe in 2010, 2013. Lumosity, the company that I'm sure you've all heard of that has the online games, was actually fined $2 million for deceptive advertising. At that time, we really didn't know, and I'm not sure we still know exactly what's needed to help keep people's minds active. So this may be the case, but we didn't know certainly at the time. And again, it's not 100% clear now what exactly is needed and what the best approaches are. But we do know it is important, and that some things help and some things actually don't. Sudoku, even though it has been touted, might be good to do sometimes. But of course, if you're sitting around for hours and hours doing puzzles, that may not be so good for you. So we know that exercise is very, very important, and sitting around doing puzzles probably not for many, many hours anyway. One approach that we've taken at NIH, we have funded, this is one example, this group in Portland led by Jeff Kay. They have a whole system set up where they can, look in people's homes, with their permission, of course, and they can set up different types of monitors. One example is they can put in the ceiling sensors that will monitor their gait speed as they walk up and down a hall. Now, it's not the case that they are, asked to walk up and down the hall. This is just in the course of their normal life. So this is the kind of thing that we think is going to transform how we understand what's going on in people's lives without being really invasive. That we have an opportunity to use this potentially for clinical trials and other ways it can potentially in the future sense if somebody falls. But gait speed is actually a really good indicator of overall health and also of cognition. So that's one example. But the idea here is that when people go into the doctor, if you're going in every 6 months, that's on the left side there, brief, episodic, clinic-based, subjective. It's what the clinician notices when the person happens to be in. It's obtrusive because you have to go to the office, which is really not easy for a lot of older adults, and it's inconvenient. So this way, and of course this can't replace everything, but it would be real time. You can know what's going on with a person as they're in their home at the moment. It's continuous, so it's not just every 6 months. It's objective because you're measuring what's actually going on. So for example, they can measure sleep with something in the underneath the mattress, and you can get a good idea of how well a person's sleeping or how many times they get up, things like that. So, for some people that may seem kind of obtrusive. You don't want somebody looking at those things. But for other people, it might give a sense of security and knowing if you could decide who that information goes to and what they might do with it in advance of you having any problems, that might be a good way. So these are some of the types of measures we're looking at. So some of us wear these, monitor our number of steps, and many other things now they can monitor. As one example, they have in these homes that are set up that I mentioned, they have a scale. The scale can actually measure blood pressure, not only weight, medication adherence. You see the pill box there, if it's not too small. They can also look at computer use. And again, not invasive. They're not looking at what website these people are looking at, but they are looking at how often they use it, because as people's cognition changes, they start using it less and less. And they look at, how they move the mouse. That can also give information about maybe arthritis or Parkinson's or many other things. So a lot of opportunity just within the home to really get a good sense. And then also mobile devices, if people have them, or driving can be monitored. And these things are flexible. There are many different pieces here. And so different people could theoretically, and this is already going on actually, decide, I want this, this, and this, but not that, that, and that. And that can happen. So these are all, again, examples of the types of things This is from a study that we actually have going on, another one that's sort of overarching above what I mentioned earlier. It's called CART, Collaborative Aging Research Using Technology. And they have folks that have agreed to participate so we can get a sense of what these types of technology can tell us. So we have cohorts in Portland. We have a veterans cohort. We have Section 202 housing. We have an African American cohort in Chicago and a Latino cohort in Miami. And so we're really getting a relatively diverse sample of people to agree to have all this in their home and give us a sense of what we can learn from this type of thing. So here are just a few quick examples. The computer use I mentioned. You see on the right there, the blue line going across is people whose cognition is just fine. And the red dots going down is people who were later diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment. You can see there's a separation even at the early part of this, and it continues to decline, just how often they use the computer. Another one that I had mentioned is sleep. So on the left side, you see all the different lines. Just to give you an idea, we can use the measures of sleep again to look at sleep behavior, and this is also predictive of cognitive decline, among other things. And it also correlates with brain measures. So I'm doing this one too, right? Yeah, okay. The third area that we covered in the report is communication and social connectivity. So again, these are just areas that we thought were very important. Obviously, hearing is a huge issue for older adults. It's very important to provide effective hearing assistance. And one of the recommendations we had was to expand acceptance and implementation of hearing assistance. So a recommendation for technology would be to develop enhanced hearing loss simulation programs. There are many needs in this area, as I'm sure you're all aware. Communication with diverse communities, we thought it was important that older adults, of course, with the many different conditions they may have, need to be able to communicate with physicians, and the physicians need to be able to communicate with patients, other clinicians as well. So something that already exists but could be better would be an ability to convert recorded audio, including videos, importantly, into text. So that could be a way to help out, one example. Social communication technologies, maintaining social connections. We know this is also very important for cognition. It's important for quality of life. And we do already have some existing research in this area that really suggests that this is very important. And as I'm sure you're all also aware, we already have the capability to connect folks, even with vision and hearing problems, to family members and telemedicine, all kinds of things. So we wanted to do even better to advance our understanding of the technological needs of older adults, and these keep changing. You know, a 90-year-old and an 80-year-old and a 50 or 60-year-old have very different needs and wants in this domain. So we need to understand people's individual needs and wants and capabilities. So we are recommending systematic research to demonstrate the effectiveness of various different types of interventions. And I'll turn it back to Dr. Iyengar. I got it.
Thank you, Nina. So it's well documented that older adults want to be able to live in their homes and their communities. So the next two functional capabilities that we addressed were personal mobility and transportation. We focused on three areas of personal mobility, so R&D recommendations to assist with assisted movement, rehabilitation in the home, and monitoring and safety. Within assisted movement, we looked at how can we design better ways, how can the tech community and the community writ large design better ways for accessible drop-off and pickup stops for assisted mobility robots, address control, comfort, and safety-related functionalities in terms of wearability, so looking at user-centered design. In terms of rehabilitation, we looked at R&D recommendations that were proposed in terms of the use of virtual reality and augmented reality and gaming systems for improving functional independence. So we know research tells us that In addition to cognitive decline with respect to across the lifespan, there's also physical and mobility declines. So how can we use virtual reality, augmented reality as interventions in the home to be able to address these physical declines? Then we looked at monitoring safety. Accompanying physical declines are falls. Falls are a big source of injury-based trauma in the community, especially falls in the home. So being able to use wearable devices to be able to monitor movement and activity, being in terms of falls prevention, and improving the reliability and usability of sensor systems and algorithms for future technologies that are addressing falls prevention in the home. As I mentioned, transportation also addresses the idea of individuals wanting to be able to age in their home or community. We looked at two specific areas that will make a lot of sense to folks in this room. One is driving, being able to assess driving fitness and control vehicle access, being able to assist drivers to extend their driving fitness across the lifespan, developing real-time links between self-assessment while one is driving and access to the vehicle, and then being able to look at assistive technologies with respect to driving that are flexible and adaptable to changes in musculoskeletal factors or driving fitness across the lifespan. Then we looked at public transportation. We're all really reliant on GPS or wayfinding and navigation systems, so being able to look at those as electronic orientation aids and then incorporating the needs of older adults in the design of those aids. And then being able to, looking at user-centered design again, being able to develop both robust and accessible interfaces for these wayfinding and GPS systems. We close with the functional capabilities in terms of access to healthcare, and two big developments within this are telehealth and e-care planning. So telehealth, especially in rural communities or communities that are physician deserts or medical deserts, so to speak, being able to improve healthcare access and quality is important. Promoting smoother care transitions and providing self-management support are going to be important. And there's a way for technology via telehealth to be able to address those gaps. So developing innovative telehealth technologies that incorporate the use of smartphones. So the majority of telehealth, to my understanding, are via tablets or computers. But now with the increasing consumption and use of smartphones, being able to then address those capabilities or adapt those capabilities for smartphone technology is going to be important. And then advancing interoperability standards and IT infrastructure to integrate telehealth services is also going to be critical in terms of boosting broadband infrastructure and healthcare infrastructure to incorporate the ability for health information technologies. E-care planning is also important. As I mentioned before, a large burden of care is going to be on family caregivers. Incorporating them into the plan for their care recipient is going to be important. So improving coordination of care, facilitate shared care planning, and proactively plan for complex, high-risk patients is going to be important as well. So these are ways that we identified within the access to healthcare functional capability bucket wherein technology can play a role in advancing healthcare in these areas. Now, we went through pretty quickly 6 functional capability areas that the task force deemed critical in terms of both addressing older adult needs and ways in which technology can help address those needs. What we did for a 7th bucket, so to speak, is take a look at all of these 6 functional capabilities and see if there were any overlaps in terms of a cross-cutting theme. And broadly, you can divide this into overlaps in the importance of user experience and user-centered design, and overlaps in terms of just the technical factors that are needed to then be able to ground these technologies and make these technologies a reality. So in terms of technical factors, one cross-cutting theme was system needs. So we basically need to be able to advance or boost our ability to store data, be able to have good database management and database management integrity. With the amount of data that we're collecting on a daily basis, we need enough storage mechanisms. They have to have high fidelity and integrity to be able to then use that data to answer a myriad of healthcare questions. Data and algorithms are going to be important, as I mentioned before, in terms of personal mobility and falls. Sensors that are used for falls management or falls prevention, you need appropriate validation of sensor-derived data. Safety and performance needs, especially in say, rural areas or resource poor areas, you need technologies that have good battery life, just from a practicality standpoint, and are immune to power and communications interruptions. And then finally, I mean, big thing in the room is privacy and security. You have to make sure that if you're handling data, if you're collecting data, if you're transferring data, and then using that data to then answer these questions, they have to be HIPAA compliant. There has to be a necessary built-in encryption, and you have to ensure a secure transmission of these PHIs, or patient health information. So those were some of the technical factors that, no matter what technology or what functional need you're looking at, any type of technology to address a functional need will have to look at these particular areas from a technical factor point of view. Then there were factors that cut across all their functional needs that were identified that were more on the user experience, user-centered design perspective. One is functionality. It's great to have a piece of technology. It's great that it works, but it's better if it's tied to an actual behavioral health outcome, right? So in this case, tying financial tools or tools to look at financial literacy and preparedness with, are they actually improving financial management, money management in the individual that's using that tool? So functionality, pairing the technology, the piece of technology, with its functionality. System evaluation. As I mentioned before, if you go on your iPhone or other smartphone, go to the App Store, there are a ton of mobile apps for healthcare, right? What's important is being able to gauge the efficiency and reliability of those interventions, whether it be app-based, mobile-based, browser-based, or a wearable device. So it's going to be important going forward that any type of technology or tool that it comes to market or is proposed or pitched has an efficient way of determining its efficacy in inducing a behavioral health change outcome. Family caregiver needs are important. Within ACL, I'm in the Office of Supportive and Caregiver Services. We dole out grants and services and supports for family caregivers and their needs. So it's important to address tools for education and training and service provision needs for family caregivers, given these are the individuals that have the highest point of engagement with the care recipient, who might be a high complex risk patient. So being able to cater these tools that are not only for the person with dementia, for example, but their caregiver is going to be vitally important. And lastly, user adoption. So as I mentioned before, you go back to your app store, there are a ton of apps. Not many of those apps have high user adoption rates. So being able to conduct usability analysis studies, not just creating an app or technology for the older adult community without their input. So bringing them on from day one at the ground level to be able to then say, can you use this piece of technology? It's going to be critically important to boost user adoption paired with its functionality and system evaluation. So these were the 4 cross-cutting themes from a user experience perspective that the task force identified as critically important when developing technologies, right? So what's next? So we have this report. It took some time, a lot of hours, a lot of conference calls, emails. So what's next? Our goal is for this report not to sit in a shelf somewhere, but rather it serve as a guidepost for individuals to take action. So I want to say what this report does not do. It doesn't assign any specific roles or responsibilities for federal agencies to take the lead on any of these R&D recommendations, nor does it urge federal agencies to obligate funds towards the R&D recommendations. So, right, it would have taken a bit longer, right, since there's so many stakeholders invested in this space. So that's what the report doesn't do. What can it do? Does it do? It will serve as a guidepost for public and private sector R&D to improve the quality of life, enhance individual choice, reduce caregiver stress, and cut healthcare costs. So if you're, say, a budding entrepreneur that's new to this area and wants to pick up a piece of literature and want to get an understanding of what the field is or what can be done, we foresee this report as being a good handbook or good resource for that budding entrepreneur or even that established firm or even somewhere in the government or even a foundation to say, okay, this is the cutting edge research. Given that the report is forward facing, that the R&D recommendations are forward facing, someone in one of those buckets could pick up the report and say, look, after reading it, I get an understanding of what the field is looking at, right? And what the field thinks is important. In terms of potential concrete follow-ups, we're still in discussion in terms of with the task force, but we want to potentially do a workshop that convenes the key stakeholders in the space, bringing in folks with a lived experience. So perhaps an older adult that is having mobility issues in the home and doesn't have access to transportation, be able to share his or her story. A researcher who's developing a technology that's potentially maybe funded by NIH to look at these advanced technologies to support cognitive monitoring, cognitive functioning. Public sector folks, maybe foundations that are maybe a think tank to look at what are the trends and be able to tell us whether what we got wrong or what we got right and what they appreciate from the report. And then private sector stakeholders that are looking to invest in this. So we think that perhaps convening these folks is one step and one way to go about taking the recommendations from the report and bringing them into life. So with that, we thank you for your time, and we're open to questions. Thanks. Thank you.
So how many copies do you have there? It's appropriate.
Oh, I have a
Yes.
few. I have about 3 left.
So any questions? Okay, Kim.
I know you talked about hearing issues,
Uh,
and it wasn't necessarily part of your scope. But did you learn anything incidentally about vision and aging?
So the question is about the hearing aid and the vision support.
Do I need to use the microphone?
Yeah, for the recording, sorry.
I mean, vision is certainly, of course, an issue, and it is something that we addressed. I wouldn't say the goals of this weren't to gather up all of the published literature in any domain, really to try to understand what the needs of the older adults were and what technology already existed and what the opportunities were for the future. And so, clearly vision is very important. We had I have to say, one of the extreme benefits, I think, of doing this report was that we all had an opportunity to meet each other and interact with people that we probably never would have otherwise. And so one of our task force members was from NASA, which some of us didn't even know they had such a program, but his area of focus was actually on hearing. So that received kind of extra attention. I don't know, do you want to add anything about vision that is additional on there?
Just what Nina said. I think it wasn't meant to be a literature review. There's certainly, we wanted to focus on things where there could be movement on with respect to how can technology or folks in any of these buckets or stakeholder groups can then provide innovation towards that. So there were certain issues that, as a group we thought, took more priority than others. Certainly vision, we believed that there was enough advancements, both from a medical and an innovation side, that it didn't, it's as equally as important as hearing, but there are a bit more opportunities at this point, from our understanding, on the hearing side of issues, so to speak, from federal research than in vision. So,
Taking from what you said this report does not do, it seems that research and development then gets extremely fragmented, which means everyone's doing everything, and how do you get to a standard, for example, compared to other countries, Scandinavian countries perhaps, or Japan, where there is a stronger federal or central government focus, where it can come up with solutions that can be widely distributed, marketed, or whatever. But of course, our country is not like that. So it is a free-for-all for research. So what idea or impressions do you have about solutions?
Actually, could you repeat the question, and then I'll repeat it for the audience?
That, you know, with research and development being so fragmented, then how does that help or impede getting solutions that are widely standardized, marketed, and made available to large numbers of people?
Right, so I guess we're repeating the question for video. The question has to do with the fact that the report wasn't aiming to come up with the answer, and there's a bit of fragmentation potentially in the recommendations and how they're carried out, especially in our country compared to other countries. Is that a fair recapitulation of the question? So that is true, and you know, obviously we weren't having the goal to realign our whole federal government, but you know, what we were trying to do partially was, as I said, bring together different agencies that might cover certain areas of research. And so now that we've had this opportunity, I think there is a lot of room for more collaboration, certainly than there had been in the past, and certainly around certain specific focus areas. And an opportunity, we already met with someone from outside who read the report and had some ideas about how to put things together. And so having the report out there, I think, offers this opportunity to bring together all these different stakeholders, like was mentioned. You know, that's one example, but because we covered so many different areas, there's really a lot of opportunity to improve from how it had been. It's not going to, you know, magically realign everything, or, you know, we couldn't make a recommendation to create some agency that would pull that together. That wasn't part of our purview, but I think it does allow for that opportunity.
Another question?
Yes, it seemed to me as I was listening at the potential going forward that this is a great opportunity to share the report, like with universities who are really focusing on student engagement, student and faculty engagement and entrepreneurship, and using technology to move forward. And you just have so many possibilities in this report in terms of where they could focus.
Right.
I just returned from a conference also, an occupational health conference, where I had a whole day talking about hearing and how serious the issue is, because the hearing loss is not confined to older adults,
Right.
but to the young people who grew up either going with their parents to the loud games and the concerts, or themselves went and lost a lot
Or
of
with the
their hearing before they were
earbuds, yeah.
even aware that that was
Right.
happening to
Right.
them. So that is a major area of further investigation.
Right, so to repeat the question, this is hard. I think it was more of a point rather than a question, but that the report is actually available online. So I guess we don't have the link in there, but
No, but you can email either one of us.
yeah,
and we can send it to you.
or use technology and find the report is available online. But the point was that it could be used in education as an opportunity of an area to focus research or see what the needs are in the field, and maybe as an educational resource. So.
So I'm a librarian at the National Library Service for the Blind and Physically Handicapped, which is a program of Library of Congress. We've been around since 1933, but I would say like 60% of the people that we serve are seniors. One thing that I'm finding, we're coming up with all kinds of digital solutions. We have something called Bard, where you can listen to our content on your phone. We have a digital talking book machine. We have all kinds of stuff coming up in the future. One thing that I am finding is that a lot of the places that people live in this country, there is not infrastructure for technology.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't get Wi-Fi, or it's not enough for we want to send, we have a machine where we can sort of send you books through the cloud. They can't get it because there's just, I mean, even if even if we do everything for the person and there's no sort of technical knowledge on their part that they need, the infrastructure is just not there in order to have those things.
So the question, if I'm characterizing correctly, is on access.
Yeah.
Access to these technologies, or infrastructure.
In a lot of the country where seniors live, because it's less expensive to live there.
Yeah.
You go to your bucolic farm or whatever, but then
There's no Wi-Fi.
there's just
Yeah.
There, I mean, okay, or not, but there's just no. They have trouble getting Wi-Fi. And it's not just like an electricity issue. It's just sort of you don't realize a lot of the country isn't really wired. It just isn't. That infrastructure just isn't there. And a lot of times we'll say, well, can you go to a local library? You know, maybe they can help you. Which is, again, taking that person out of their house, and that's hard for them to be able to do. So what I'm saying is, like, even when we make these machines and everything, and we make this stuff available to people, they're not able to access it because their communities, the actual physical places that they live, there's no digital infrastructure there to support it.
No, I think that's a great point. I think access, you could come at it a couple of ways. One is just physical proximal or distal access to it. Are you physically not located in places where these technological innovations are taking place? That's one of the themes that, due to infrastructure requirements or the absence of adequate infrastructure, that's one of the cross-cutting themes that we hit on. Any type of technology, whether it be telehealth or tools to combat social isolation or connectedness, have to rely on, especially if they want to reach rural areas, rural communities, for example, they have to be relying on an infrastructure that will support that. Now, we touch on that as a cross-cutting theme that's important. The other bit of access I would add on to your question is developing tools that are accessible to a diverse set of populations across the socioeconomic spectrum, across different levels of technological sophistication or digital literacy. That's another access point that we try to touch on vaguely with the report. And those are two critical needs. We address it with the report as any type of future technology will have to keep these things in mind. Another point would be in terms of access, not so much on the infrastructure part, but on the design part is folks that are developing these tools should incorporate feedback from older adults, from seniors that are living in different parts of the nation. They can't just talk to folks that are in urban areas, but talk to folks that are in rural areas or areas where they might not be as technologically sophisticated, right? For lack of a better phrase, right?
And it's not, I mean, that's what I do all day long, essentially. But it's not even that they're not like technological. Like my mother is 86 and she can't use a computer to save her life. But that's not like the situation, because we have developed things where we can just flash that to your box, right? But we need Wi-Fi to be able to do that somewhere in the community, and they just don't. It's just not there. Just don't have it.
Well, look, we'd love to get your feedback upon reading the report or reviewing it, and see where you think we could have done better.
Okay.
Yeah.
There's another question.
Hi, and this is also part of what your report was never meant to do. But I'm a college professor, retired from the UC system in California, and technology did a terrible disservice to education as well as a great service, because technology began to drive the decision about what students need. And we found, for example, in the Chronicle of Higher Education, 60% of students hate PowerPoint. They despise it, and they don't feel it's a good learning tool. And yet professors continually to get trained in staff development and technologies that don't really serve the ultimate goal. And I'm not a Luddite. Let me be very clear about that. But part of the thing, and it has to do with the nature of how the task was defined for you guys, is that what is it that we really want for people at 75? We can decline, we can monitor and manage decline, but how do we define that in terms of the quality of life? Just like in the classroom, what is it that we can most improve in order that students learn to become critical thinkers? And one of the things that I sort of look at this is there's all these creative, great things that you all came up with to sort of address that. But primarily, elders are lonely. They want human contact. The best experiences, even in Amsterdam, have been mixing elderly and youthful educational systems together, but they want to be touched. They want to continue intimacy. There's all of these dynamics that technology might find a way under the ground to support, but it can't be the way in which, and I don't think that's what you guys were doing. But
Well,
for some people, if it's driven by businesses creating products to address this, that it's more about the profit making of the products that they're creating rather than the real dynamic. The other thing is you're dealing with a generation that doesn't particularly trust technology. You're also dealing with a generation, I'm not gonna like to put stuff in my house, by the way, just not gonna happen.
Yeah.
And there is no safety and security to protect it, even when they have the laws. We know this,
Right.
but we continue to tell ourselves something else. And my generation is just a little older and a little bit sharper and a little bit more direct about not gonna happen. And that comes from knowing who you're addressing.
Absolutely.
And so
Yeah.
I'm gonna stop there.
Thank you. No, I mean, these are things that we did discuss in the group, and I really, really wish my colleague, who was my co-chair, Michelle Grimm, she's an engineer, and she pretty much demanded that we do a needs assessment before we got started, because that's what engineers do.
People and what can support them.
Right. Yep. So we did. Yeah, we asked all of our different groups for each topic area to figure out, and sometimes we couldn't really do that, but at least tried to look at what's out there in terms of, researchers do what you're asking, assess what people want, what they need, and companies, it's hard to make money if people don't want your product. So they do have an interest in making sure that what they're building is something that people are going to want and need. So.
Say that to negate what you did. I think it's really important.
No. I mean,
one of the tools that you have.
Absolutely.
But it's also not about creating products. It's about saying what makes somebody's life better.
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
And
so
what happens when we get into technology and technology drives the question, that it doesn't deal with that question, it deals with the products. And that's never going to help a lonely senior person to get touched or talked to or feel like somebody cares.
Yes, so we did try to point out and let us know if we didn't succeed that technology is not a solution for everything. Well, to repeat your question or point, there are certain things that older adults want and need that technology just certainly can't really address, certainly not directly, possibly indirectly. And we couldn't begin to do everything with this. We tried to address what the needs were and what is currently out there and what could be developed that would help. And noting that nothing is an all-out solution for all needs. But we did have many discussions on exactly these points that you're raising. So I think they're very important, and we tried to acknowledge them. But as Vijeth said, please have a view of the report and let us know what you think.
I just had to piggyback on what this lady said, because when technology started being introduced into healthcare, one of the major things we point out, especially in the aging population, is that it was making healthcare more high-tech and low-touch. And we definitely need something that's high-touch.
Right.
And that's probably the one obstacle we've not addressed or tried to figure out how we could do that.
Right. So.
Other thing is, she mentioned loneliness and lack of connectivity. Cigna Insurance Company introduced sometime last year, actually I went to a conference that they held, talking about the loneliness index. They think that's an epidemic,
Especially in older adults.
Research. And it's not. That was an interesting thing, only in the older adult or older population. But in young people who stay connected to their high-tech stuff, and so they're just so focused on that, and they find they have no social connectivity because they're so into the technology. So that loneliness piece also needs to be addressed, because it's leading to other mental health issues, which in itself is a major.
Right, yeah, so to go back to your point, which I didn't repeat for the camera, was that technology can actually be harmful in some ways, that not only may not be a solution, but it may cause people to do things in different ways than obviously the original intention, and that would not lead to a better quality of life. So these are definitely things that need to be taken into consideration. We did try to address loneliness and connectivity as a whole topic area. I think probably putting the example of the robotics in terms of taking care of people, you know, it may help with some things, but it may make other things worse, or it may, you know, not be a solution for, clearly not for certain situations. But we tried to cover a very broad range of things, and some things, it requires research. It requires asking the person, is this helping you? Is this causing harm? Is, you know, are there better ways we could do this? So, you know, clearly loneliness is a big issue. We do have some technological solutions that can help. It's not gonna, you know, transport your kid to your house to help, you know, physically be there for you, but it may help you at least stay in touch with them. So we have to recognize what can and can't be done, and where we can improve things, make things better than they were, and I don't know, do the best we can.
One more question, please.
Yes, sir. When you started out your presentation, you talked about the aging of the population. And so that's an educated prediction on where we're going to be in the future. And I wondered, did you make a judgment on, of that aging population, how many of those people will not be able to care for themselves, and then what the cost of that care would be?
So the question was on, did we estimate a cost of care for individuals that could not care for themselves? And
Estimate, or were you able to estimate, as you look forward, of the increased aging population, what percentage of that population will not be able to take care of themselves at some point? And then what the cost of providing that care would be?
I want to say no to both questions. Those are really important points that you made in terms of cost, the number of individuals in the decades to come that won't be able to care for themselves, and then the subsequent cost of care for those individuals. You know, that was, I would say that was outside the scope of the report. Certainly that could be a motivating factor for why we would need such a report, and wherein technology can play a role in addressing cost and potentially driving it down. What I can say is that there is evidence showing that the number of individuals living alone without a caregiver is increasing, and the number of individuals living with dementia alone is increasing. So that gets a bit to your point, in that while I don't have specific concrete figures that I can point you to, I can suggest that it is a growing share of the individuals with dementia, or that the individuals that are going through healthy aging, right, or non-pathological aging. So that's going to be important. But then you can see that if someone is living alone without a caregiver, that remote caregiving is going to be important. So if I'm at work and I'm caring for, say, a grandparent or a dad or parent that's at home, if you read reports, say from AARP and others, one of the biggest pain points for caregivers is that they want peace of mind. I want to be able to do my job and not have to worry every second or minute of the day that my care recipient or my loved one could have fallen in home, right? So technically, that person is living home alone for a period of time without potentially contact with their caregiver. But you could see a role for technology in terms of remote caregiving, to then be able for that person to look at the home and see whether that person's that they're caring for is doing okay.
So that's kind of a stage that I've observed. But the next stage is that's kind of a part-time caregiving,
right,
where the individual and the caregiver kind of share that.
Yeah.
But in many cases, we know it gets to the point where an individual will need full-time care.
Right.
and in most cases, someone can't provide full-time care after work or in their spare time, or can't provide full-time private care in their home. And so we see all of the assisted living, nursing homes, all of those type of things. And as we know, it's very, very expensive. And so that gets back to my question. When you're looking at how we're going to deal with this, the medical care would be wonderful. We could cure it, and then it's not an issue. And, when I'm 100 years old, I had a nice meatloaf dinner with the bed. But as we deal with that, then we're looking at how we address that, how we expend the resources. Are we going to expend the resources on medical research and trying to cure or treat it, and/or are we going to look at a lot of the palliative care, issues that we're trying to make people as comfortable as they can in this road that I think we recognize really never gets better. It always slowly declines.
Yeah. I think those are really great points. I wish the scope of the report was a bit wider to address those, but those are really important points. Yeah, appreciate you bringing that up. Yeah.
Last question? Yeah.
Yes, I want to share with you a personal example for me and help give another different point. So my mom and dad were married for 65 years. My dad passed away, and I was managing my mom in her home by herself. Getting her to doctor's appointments, getting her prescriptions filled, is she okay, is she not, paying her bills. I mean, there was an aura of things that I was doing remotely for her. So I would not discount what the private sector can do with their intelligence to help those kinds of situations. Right now, there's a company in Atlanta, Georgia, who is a logistical transportation company who is signing people up, seniors, specifically to take them to doctor's appointments. So the people are cleared, they're bonded, they're not getting in a car with somebody. So, I had companionship going in there. I don't know if the people were there all the time. I mean, it got to the point I had to move her to an assisted living, and now she's in a memory care. But gosh, there is an opportunity to help keep people in their home, and really there's nothing wrong with taking two seniors and putting them in the same place, or three in the same place. We've got to think outside of what the traditional living arrangement is to make it work, and it can work. But I would not discount what the private sector can do, and I appreciate the profit making that they have to do, but there's a lot of good companies out there, Google and Apple, who will, I think, generate what we may need to help this program.
So the comment was it's important not to discount the contribution of the private sector, and I think we would wholeheartedly agree. If you look in the report, and certainly if you don't have a hard copy, email one of us and we'll send you a soft copy. But so we don't mention any specific products or companies, what they're doing, but if you read the news, if you're watching Bloomberg or whatever, CNN or whatever, there are companies doing what you just said. I think one of the biggest problems is missed medical appointments, and that the implications of that just for one's personal health, and then a billing. And there are companies such as what you described that are looking to close the loop on that.
There's a builder in the Midwest that has built a whole community based on what it was like in 1940 and 1950. There's streets, they put the people in there, it's a contained place, but their whole outlook on life has been positive.
I just have a technical thing. The charts that you showed in the beginning about global aging, they're not in the report. Is there a place that we can access those?
Yeah. It's yeah, we do. We can shoot me an email, and I can certainly give you the report, a link to the report. But It's from the World Report on Aging and Health in 2015. Any other comments or thoughts? Or? Oh, wait, we can talk about that. Okay. All right.
Well, we must,
you so much.
all good things come to an end, and we have to wrap this up. But this should not be the end. This is the second time we've had our two guests here, and third, really giving us an update, and it's been clearly very thought-provoking, and we've had a very lively discussion. And I must thank you both for making this as informative and yet engaging as it has been. And I don't think there's anyone here who could say otherwise. They may be able to say even better than I how good it was. We do have everyone's email address, and so we can send a thank you note providing the two, in case some people didn't get it, the two email addresses for two speakers, and also providing you anything that the speaker would like to send out to the group. So that will help facilitate, through technology, staying in touch and keeping up to date. So thank you once again. And unless we have you on our radar for our Family Health and Wellness Day in August.
Oh, cool.
So it will be over here in Montpelier, and we really would like to have you there. I've already put in a plug for it, so.
Yes, I
Yes.
already know you.
So thank you everyone for coming. When this is ready, it will be posted, Tomoko, on the
On the website,
Science and Technology website, open to the public. So it was really a very, very informative session, and I'm glad you're here and glad you came. Thank you.